history is often a far-off place buried away among the pages of books. Here in Whistler, the past still paddles steadfastly into the present. The big mountain resort isn't more than a few decades old, so the young town and her citizens have grown up with each other, side by side. Whistler's growing pains are their growing pains. The resort's success, their triumphs. The two are always connected and ever present, with the mountains always watching. This is Whistler's coming-of-age tale, so who better to tell her story than the people who live here, dream here.
History is people, and there's a lot of people that have made some big sacrifices, have contributed a lot, have done some big things. If we don't remember those people and that history, we're just far less whole. It's the people that make a place.
These are their memories, their stories, their Whistler. Florence Peterson paddles Alta Lake. The shores she looks to are filled with memories of Whistler's sunshine beginnings, a summer hideaway called Alta Lake that began in the early 1900s.
Rainbow Lodge was very, very well attended by honeymooners, people celebrating anniversaries, and they found it a very relaxing and pleasant and natural place.
This was the area's first incarnation as a tourist destination, the most popular summer vacation hideaway west of Banff. Rainbow Lodge was the cornerstone, and the string of glassy, sometimes frozen lakes, strung like black pearls around thick forests, were what drew people here. Summer or winter, Florence has many recollections of a time when only a few lakeside lodges and clusters of cabins made up the Alta Lake community. So many of these stories fall into a smile about Myrtle Phillip, the valley's first lady.
She was a tremendous lady, and the whole area owes a lot to Myrtle. She came here in 1911. The Phillips always had wanted to start a fishing lodge. And they walked up from Squamish. They took a day trip by steamer to Squamish and then walked with a pack horse to John Miller at Function Junction. And he had a roadhouse there, an early B&B. And then they bought 10 acres from Charlie Chandler, where Rainbow Park is today.
There wasn't much in the valley until then. A few homesteaders after World War I settled into log, mill, trap, and fish. A new era was building, with the Phillips leading the way. Myrtle and her family from Maine chopped and peeled logs by hand to build Rainbow Lodge at Alta Lake, while Myrtle's husband Alex stayed in Vancouver to make a living. The summer vacation escape was truly a pot of gold on the other side of the rainbow.
There were maybe half a dozen families that lived here most of the year, and maybe another dozen that came in for summer residencing. Everybody pitched in with everything. We had a Alta Lake Community Club. They had a great clay tennis court. Myrtle loved horseback riding as well and had 20 horses in her stable at its height. And they welcomed we summer people because it was fresh blood, I suppose, and more hands to help.
Like Myrtle, Florence was in her 20s when she first visited the valley. She and 4 other teachers pooled their money to buy a summer vacation cabin for $1,500 on Alta Lake. The property is just next door to where Florence still lives today.
There were no amenities. You had an outhouse. There was no electricity. You had coal oil lamps. You split wood and you learned how to buck up and work hard. You had to bring your food in with you or order from a catalog at Woodward's food department in Vancouver, and it came up once a week on the train, and they had a bit of a refrigeration set up, and therefore you could get some fresh meat that day.
The Alta Lake train station grew to become the town site, boasting a community with lodges and hotels. Myrtle was truly a woman ahead of her time, and not surprisingly, so too were her dreams for the valley.
She welcomed change and modernity. She was a leader in all facets. She was a mentally broad-minded. She was more accepting when skiing came and ruined our valley, as far as many of us were concerned.
Summer soon faded to winter, and with the change of seasons, so too came a change in the valley's possibilities. The journey of Whistler as host mountain for the 2010 Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games began with a group of Vancouver businessmen who saw gold medal dreams when looking on London Mountain more than 5 decades ago. International Olympic Committee member Sydney Dawes was invited to take a look.
That year, Sydney made a trip out here. They went up by helicopter and they came further north, and he said, "That's it, London Mountain."
And the magic began. London Mountain, later called Whistler Mountain, was a clean slate of raw and rugged wilderness located in Garibaldi Provincial Park. The possibilities were endless. The Garibaldi Olympic Development Association was formed with the goal of transforming the area into an Olympic host mountain. 4 attempts were made both in Canadian nominations and outright bids for the Games until 1980. Whistler even piggybacked Vancouver's bid as host mountain for the 1988 Games. 5 attempts were made, and all 5 failed. Like with any child, first steps are often accompanied by first falls, and from those tumbles, Whistler learned to walk. Gary Watson, who sat on the 1968 bid, visits the Whistler Museum. He saw the development of the mountains and village rise from Whistler's earlier failings.
That's what got Whistler started, was the idea of bringing the Olympics here, and we worked very hard unsuccessfully, as it turned out, on several bids, but those bids lay the foundation for the concept of what Whistler could become.
Whistler Village was still literally a mountain away in the 1960s. Ski hill development began in Creekside on the south side of Whistler Mountain, with Franz Williamson pointing the way as president of the newly formed Garibaldi Lifts Limited. The lift company would develop a 4-person gondola, double chairlift, 2 T-bars, and a day lodge, along with several ski runs. Franz, like any parent, had great ambitions for his little mountain. Before opening in 1965, the ski hill didn't look very promising.
We came first 66 in the summer, at a time when we were flabbergasted to see what was here, because it didn't look like a ski area at all. The original gondola run basically gave the impression of a stone quarry. And we looked at this and I said to myself, God, these people, they've got to have their head examined.
One of those heads in need of examining was Stefan Pless. He made the arduous trek up and down the skiway now called the Pony Trail to bring supplies to construction crew on top of Whistler Mountain.
My dad used to take the ponies up the Pony Trail and bring the supplies to the people that were working building the lifts. And they were housed in the valley at the bottom of the top T-bar.
Wood and equipment was hauled up almost 4,000 painstaking feet. The top of Whistler Mountain was a wide open canvas, and soon the roundhouse and lifts began to take shape. While one road went up the mountain, another gravel path was built, finally connecting Whistler with Squamish and later Vancouver in 1965.
The highway wasn't anywhere near what it is today. It was single lane Bailey bridges, gravel, crush road, no pavement in some places, and a rather treacherous drive.
Some people understand the hardships that we went through initially to develop some of the services that are here, and the conditions of the road, for instance, from Squamish to here would generally take us in our little Land Rover something like 4 or 5 hours to get here, fording creeks and carrying a little winch on board and planks on the roof to get up here.
Garibaldi Mountain officially opened February 15, 1966. Gravity chasers were let loose on North America's biggest ski playground. The weekend lineups eventually grew and grew. $4 bought access to more than 4,200 vertical feet of pure mountain madness.
In the late 60s, in the wild and woolly days of this valley, when the lift company Garibaldi Lifts was the only game in town, and lineups in about 68, 69 started to get rather longish to go up the hill, and it would not be unusual for you to wait till 11 o'clock to actually get on the lift. The lift company then started to bring in boarding passes, and then of course, as usual, there's always somebody who finds a way around the system, and there was a bunch of young kids in a Volkswagen van, of course, who tootled into the parking lot with a mobile printing shop, and they would just simply have a look at what boarding pass was loading right now, and they print off these boarding passes, and they even went as far as printing seasons passes and selling them for $50.
Demand was high. This was a modern ski hill boasting the high-tech novelty of BC's first gondola. Whistler was also responsible for bringing another important innovation to the West, the now ubiquitous condo.
Nothing had been built around Whistler. There were old cabins and so forth. And my husband phoned me from the office one day and said, if they're thinking about building this Whistler, London Mountain they called it, would you like to buy one of the condos that are being built here? And I said, what is a condo? I'd never heard of the word. There wasn't such a word. And he explained it to me. And I said, sounds wonderful, but do we have indoor toilets? Do we have to smash ice to get water?
Of course not. This was luxury living with indoor plumbing and electric stoves, thanks to the power station built to run the lifts on the mountain, where skiing wasn't quite as lavish.
They had the initial small gondola at Creekside, and then you went on to a double red chair, which moved agonizingly slow up to what was the roundhouse in those days. And you sat there and froze to death for about 25 minutes going from the mid-station to the top. The skiing was, of course, no grooming. So whenever we had a dump, there was just, especially if it was soggy, it was pretty deadly. Lots of people got hurt.
Skiers worked hard for their steep lines.
There was no Blackcomb in those days. There was no peak chair in those days. Everybody hiked if you wanted to get into any powder snow, if you wanted to ski the Shell Slope, or if you wanted to get into Whistler Bowl. When the powder snow was skied out, then everybody stopped hiking, which meant no moguls ever got built up.
Good morning. Looks like a great day up there.
Powder brought Linda and Walter Selmer to Whistler to join the other 40 men and women who formed the first ski patrol team.
We were led by Tony Lytle, and he was the kind of person that could tell you to go and stand in a blizzard for an hour, and you would do it. You wouldn't question him.
Nor did they question the sanity of signing up for a volunteer position that had them standing in the cold all day long, a time blue skies away from the present.
In those days, they had there were no radios, so what we used in order to patrol the mountain fairly regularly was what's called the bump system. You waited up at the top of the lift until the next two patrollers came, and then when they were up there, so there was always somebody to respond to an emergency, when they were up there, then you had the opportunity to patrol whatever run you were assigned to for that day. And that usually meant that you were standing up there often in the snow and blowing wind with very little in the way of shelter.
And needless to say, this was before Gore-Tex, waterproof, windproof clothing. The clothing was completely inadequate for what we had.
Clothing wasn't the only inadequate thing, and people complain about housing problems today.
There was some construction trailers that we were told we could use, but very soon it was decided that those wouldn't be available. It was tough to get accommodation up here, so we would late at night put a couple of benches together in the hallway outside the bathrooms and cafeteria, and that would be where we'd get a few hours sleep.
Whistler Village didn't exist yet. Creekside was the hub of the community.
When they were building Garibaldi lifts out of Creekside. It brought the development at Alta Vista, and then started to develop the Alpine Meadows and Emerald estates for small A-frames and Gothic arch ski weekend cabins. We ended up with a gas station. We had the cafeteria and restaurant at the foot of the lift, which meant you could go out to dine, you know. Finally, there was a place to go out of your own home.
It was tough living. It took a lot of drive to get here, and even more stamina to stay. Whistler's pioneers take nothing for granted these days. Even something as simple as cashing a check is considered a luxury by Alex Kleinman.
Every 2 weeks when you got paid, you finished work at 4, the banks closed in Squamish at 5. And there was no one here that would cash a check, especially not a Whistler Mountain check, because they'd already had quite a few financial problems. It wasn't a very solid enterprise at that point. So the exodus at 4 o'clock, you stood in line, you got your check, and you drove like a madman down to Squamish.
Business did stabilize, though, with the advent of the weekend warrior and recreation properties. City folk arrived by the busload for Whistler's astronomical dumps, averaging 10 meters of snow a year.
Of course, back in 60, 67, 68, people who came here were from Vancouver. A few people from Washington, from Seattle had heard about it and were coming here. Starting sometime in the early 70s, we started to notice that the Japanese were coming. I would meet people from California who had found out about this place, and they'd come up here regularly, but they wouldn't tell their friends about it. They didn't want anybody else to know about it in those days.
People did find out about the little mountain that could. The quiet family hill turned into a party haven, with the Woodstock generation moving in.
When skiing first came, it did change life. We had to begin locking our doors. Any new area brings a lot of freeloaders or opportunists, and there was a lot of thievery. It changed the whole picture of what life was like. Sort of the outside world came in and invaded.
The age of the ski bum snowed down on Whistler in full force, with loud hair, loud music, loud everything. Whistler's wild and unruly teen years charged ahead with reckless abandon. That freedom is what drew one of Whistler's original ski bums. Some know him as Ken Malamud, others as a veteran ski patroller, but most address him as the mayor of Whistler.
When we came here, it was really hardcore. It was hardcore people who were almost escapees, because there was very little here. We moved here, there were 500 people. It was like a frontier town, really. But that being said, the upside was the powder never got skied out.
Chasing powder and cheap living were what Whistler's hippie days were all about. Doug Craig, more famously known as Guitar Doug of the Hair Farmers, originally set up house on 4 wheels.
Well, when I first got to Whistler, I came out in a Volkswagen. I had a Marshall stack, a Les Paul, and an acoustic guitar in there, and I lived in the parking lot, which is now called Lot 5. And I lived in Lot 4 and Lot 3 and Lot 1. A typical day would consist of trying to get out of my Volkswagen. Usually the doors would freeze, so I'd have to kick one of the doors open, I'd get out. I'd pull my skis out from underneath the car because there was no room. I came out here to make money for tuition, and I never left. I ended up squatting for like 8 years. I was completely blind. Love is blind. I fell in love with this place.
Along with squatting, getting a free ski pass was also the ski bum way. Craig, a former Armani model, now wore a different kind of suit. He used to hike up to mid-station, lift ticket free. Some called it scamming. He preferred the term morning warm-up.
We would ski Whistler till about 3 o'clock and then get home, and there was a communal kitchen. And usually it would consist of poultry products and some type of Vegemite concoction. and anything that basically didn't have any mold on it.
After the recession of 1981, Whistler expanded its tourism appeal to the summer season. Instead of skiers, lifts now carry on average 100,000 mountain bikers up the hill every summer at the Whistler Mountain Bike Park. Every Thursday night, hundreds of locals gather around bikes and beer as part of the Whistler Off-Road Cycling Association. No longer just a ski community, Whistler has rounded out its identity to embrace all 4 of the seasons.
If you pick 50 cars coming up the road, you'll have 40 different reasons for coming here. I want to go in the backcountry, I want to go on the groomers, I want to go on the bumps, I want to ride the pipe. And in the summer, it's the same kind of thing. I'm going to go on the valley trail, I'm going to go on River Runs Through It, I'm going to head Kill Me, Thrill Me. You want it, you can get it in Whistler.
In the Village Plaza, which is it's about a 2-minute walk from here down the stroll.
Whistler has matured into adulthood with greater responsibilities as a leader. But can the community stand up to her new image and still retain her humble start? We only need to look to the people of the mountains to know how Whistler's coming-of-age tale will carry on.
It changed the way of life for sure, but as we get older, we enjoy flipping a switch for heat in the house, I'll tell you. Myrtle loved the change. She accepted it far better than I did at the beginning. To see it today, she would be overjoyed to think that the Olympics were coming. She would just think that was packed and parcel of what should be shown about the valley.
No matter how many changes Whistler looks out on, her magic still rises and sets in these quiet moments. A time when her spirit is all aglow in the love story between her people and the Whistler they call home.